With long hair, pre-teenagehood, and a close connection with stereotypical female pursuits such as horse riding, sewing, and cookery, I could have been confused as a pre-op transgender woman. Despite this and a confusing opposite gender nickname, I can't say I've experienced anywhere near the level of uncertainty many trans people feel when it comes to who they are and what makes them them. Because of this, I'm only an outsider in perspective. But I can see both sides of an argument without completely losing it, hopefully. Unfortunately, this has allowed me to see the issues raised by many regarding the safety of others, which have been highlighted many times throughout the years, but not really recognised by most people. So let's see what I'm on about, and if any of my solutions are liable to work. This is obviously a transgender argument, but first let's consider it, as you put, from the only religious angle that is applicable here. Note, I'm not referring to the Bible in Genesis saying that God made them man and woman, because in Paul's letter to the Hebrews, he mentioned that God can separate body, soul, and spirit, implying 3 parts to human nature, which could, in theory, have its own gender. Considering we don't know what God was looking at when he named them man and woman, we can't say for certain that our definitions will hold up. Add that to the concept of hermaphroditism, which takes the binary sex of the body and returns the biscuits it apparently took, and we can't claim transgenderism isn't a thing. So, is there any other religious angle we can apply? Well, interesting that there is. I'm talking about body modification, implants, tattoos, and other cosmetic procedures. The arguments include your body is a temple to the Lord, treat it with respect. However, how far does this body modification argument go? And more importantly, where does it start? If we can't put more colours into our skin with tattoos, can we get our faces painted, have spray tans, go on a sunbed, or even go sunbathing to get a tan? If we can't get implants like silicone bumps or Botox injections, what about facial reconstruction, a prosthetic limb, steroid injections, or even weight training to gain muscle mass? To be honest, whilst I like the idea of having big muscles to make heavy lifting easier, as well as attracting the ladies, I'm not going to lie about that, I can't see the point of going to the gym to do it. Mainly, I don't see why I should spend money on something purely for display when I can do a job that increases the likelihood of needing and therefore gaining the required musculature. You're not only getting the muscles that look good, you also can use them in the way that helps the most, along with being increasingly productive. So far from being a waste, it's being helpful. The idea of keeping our bodies exactly as they are in order to preserve the temple of the Lord is like ignoring the fact a cathedral is falling apart and requires maintenance by any means necessary. You could say this is going to the realm of medicine, which is, like I said, where we go to certain injections, plastic surgery, and of course prosthesis. But why not add a few things to make it stand longer? Put a few more colours, or even add a new wing. I know people are going to say that building muscles through exercise and sunbathing for a tan are natural changes, but unless you're an active service of goodness, I think they're just as much a difference to the norm as getting inked or pierced. How is this linked to transgenderism? Well, the term transgender literally means moving between genders. That doesn't mean This doesn't just mean the mental adjustment to the gender that you feel you are, but in many cases, the full transition to that sex. The ultimate body alteration, you could say. Does this make the temple of the Lord a completely different entity, due to the complete rebuilding of set aspects of the structure? I don't think so. Firstly, because many a temple needs some useless parts sectioned off, or additional parts added, none of which, hopefully, for debaucherous purposes, but just as much worship of the Lord in the manner best fitted to the building. Yes, this building analogy may not suffice, but when referring to the temple of the Lord, and you're going to use that argument, you can't really be picky about it. Secondly, with the additional surgery to modifications to the human body and the argument of how far seemingly natural modifications like muscles and skin tone can go, adding hormones to the mix isn't that unreasonable compared to steroids and melanin. The argument against vaccines could come into play here, but since there's not really a general passage concerning injections of any kind in the Bible, I'm inclined to think it's not going to make any ground here. In short, as far as the Bible's standpoint on body modification goes, complete transition or carefully regulated hormone therapy isn't sinful, and in some cases can be beneficial to the person seeking it. However, this is the final step in gender reassignment and changing of sex. What about the part which I feel is the most important part of the transgender process, and one that many Christians raise as an issue, and indeed by secularists? The gender fluid, gender identity stage is important, and is the point that could cause a lot of contention. I've heard people wanting to transition from one sex, and then want to transition back to the first, and then back to the second again. All of which doesn't really help the credibility of trans rights. It isn't a stage to breeze through lightly, and should, in all seriousness, be taken as a time of reflection, self-exploration, and maybe therapy. I would like to clarify, I don't mean therapy to discourage it, but to fully understand what one is feeling before they choose to take the next step and become their genuine sex. At this stage, however, this is where societal norms get in the way and common conveniences become a point of contention. In watching videos by Lex Mayer of Unlearn the Lies, I found his argument against transgenderism is more out of concern of the safety of women and girls. If a man claims to identify as a woman, only to take advantage of it, enter a woman's bathroom for the purpose of perving or even assaulting women and girls in what is meant to be a safe haven. You may think it sounds far-fetched, but it's not as far out there as we might hope, since criminals of all kinds have transgressed boundaries in this manner since before records began, using whatever loopholes is open to them. Unfortunately, we can't even say it's only hypothetical, since a recent case here in Scotland has made the headlines and caused ripples in the LGBT+ circles of Hollywood. There are many more that have cropped up throughout the years. For those of you who aren't aware, a man by the name of Adam Graham, was convicted of raping 2 women in Scotland. But at some point in the time between committing the crime and sentenced for that crime, he started identifying as female and went by the name of Isla Branson. This led to a massive hoo-ha amongst the trans rights campaigners and the Scottish criminal system and courts. Some of the criminals were committed by a man and convicted, and the convict was arrested and charged as a man, and so should be put in a prison for men. However, trans rights activists say she identifies as a woman and so should be remanded in a female prison. This raises concerns over the safety of women in prisons, and many of whom have already faced abuse and trauma at the hands of men. If they are in recovery or therapy from it, a well-known rapist entering their sanctum could put them back some way. This is not a new thing, and in fact has happened before, as one person has not only raped women outside of prison, but has transitioned whilst in prison, while still holding the male genitalia, and entered a female facility, was transitioned to a female facility and further abused women. Should this affect the prison system in any way, shape or form? Since statistics show that transgender crimes, both male and female, are a minority, this implies there isn't any need to shift it and merely have an exception to the general rule. I'm sure some people in any trans camp will say this is a classic example of what can happen and will happen again. Having an argument with someone about abortion of rape victims, for rape victims, and pointing out that it's rare for that to be the case, is to say the exception, not the rule, and shouldn't change the rules at all. Would seem appropriate, but this highlights the dangers of the 1%. So regardless of our feelings on the subject, we should be aware of the dangers it presents. One could say that this violation of a female refuge is similar to trans athletes competing in women's sports. In some ways, yes, and I will cover that. But the main issue is that a former male competing in a female sports category is going to have a natural advantage, especially if they are either pre-op or transitioning after they developed under the influence of male hormones. This would be analogous to competing or training under the influence of performance or development enhancing drugs, which are already illegal in every sporting event, regardless of the category of gender, mass or ability. If a woman had taken drugs to enhance their prowess, they would be banned from that sport, since it's changing their bodies to improve their chances unfairly. So how is this any different? Going back to the issue of safety, formerly beloved author J.K. Rowling was slammed on social media when she aired her transgender views. But it's worthwhile noting that it's not dissimilar to how atheists raised in an uncompromising fundamentalist household or community responds to religion, or people raised in druggy or alcoholic homes respond to those substances. Rowling was a victim of domestic abuse and sexual assault, which she had no support for in her area. This has led to her solid views on trans women entering the safe space created for cis women in that situation was far from gaining the popularity amongst those of her fans who found her books a means of liberating their gender identity. She is making a point that is being ignored by those focusing on gaining the rights of those trying to fit into the world that is just not welcoming to them. It's a sad reality. She's trying to protect people, but it's also technically attacking those who deserve just as much safety as anyone else. So is there a solution to this? I think there is, but it's not going to please the trans rights activists, my sister-in-law being one of them, so I'm sorry about that. Whilst one of the many arguments within the LGBT plus community to justify their existence is that you can't judge the gender of a person by their genitals, unfortunately, there's the best deciding factor for this highly controversial debate. If you trained and developed with a stud tackle, you jockey up with the men. If you